In the name of God, the beneficent, the merciful, peace and love be with you all. And welcome to our Ramadan podcast with Inspire, Serve, and Build, a space where we explore faith, we explore humanity, leadership, and deeper questions of life. In our world today, I'll say that hospitals are places where the full spectrum of the human experience unfold. They're places of hope and healing, but also a place of fear, uncertainty, grief, and sometimes I'll say it's a place of goodbyes. In those moments beyond medicine and technology, there is something else people search for. The search for meaning, the search for comfort, and the search for God. And that is where the quiet yet powerful work of chaplains come in. Healthcare chaplains walk with people in their most vulnerable moments. When families are praying for a miracle, when patients are searching for strength, and when souls are preparing to transition from this world, I'll say I'm honored today to welcome someone who dedicated her life to this sacred work. Our guest today is Chaplain Tamar. Our beloved and adored Chaplain Tamar is a multi-faith hospital chaplain in Flushing, Queens, where she focused especially on palliative care and end-of-life spiritual support. Her journey into chaplaincy is quite unique. Before entering into spiritual care and emotional care for patients, Chaplain Tamar had a successful career as an attorney, but her love for theology, faith, and service eventually led her to the path of caring for people in hospitals. I must say she's an modern Orthodox Jew, deeply rooted in the Torah learning and spiritual reflection. In her work, she's guided by two powerful, something that I admire deeply, two powerful Jewish values. And I hope I say these Jewish words, these words correctly. Chest, which is love and kindness, and tikkun olam, preparing and healing the world. Quite needed in our world today. These values shaped how she walks with patients and families during the most difficult moments. Tamar, it's definitely an honor and a privilege to have you here on our podcast. And I will say to our listeners that, it's important for us to pay attention to today's discourse. For our listeners, Tamar, who may not be familiar with healthcare chaplaincy, can you tell us, a little bit about your journey and what inspired you to become a healthcare chaplain?
Of course, and just such an honor to be here with you today, Imam Safraz. Really, just so thrilled. My journey, as you said, I had a career first as an attorney, and then I took off a whole bunch of time to raise my children. And then as my youngest got to an age where he was pretty independent, I realized I needed to think about what was next. And down the street from my house in the Bronx, there was a small seminary, a Jewish seminary for women. And I went back there and I just started taking some classes, some Torah classes, some Bible classes. And before I knew it, they had a full-time program. I joined that program. And one of the requirements is that you had to give back to the community, and not just to the Jewish community. You had to give back to the city of New York. And the way they encouraged you to do that was to either go to a nursing home or a hospital or a prison and do a formal unit of chaplaincy training. So I signed up for that program. I was hoping to be at a place 5 minutes from my house and just somehow get through this summer unit of training. And then somehow I ended up placed in Queens in a hospital. I showed up my first day, and the education group that we joined to learn how to do chaplaincy was run run by a Tibetan Buddhist monk, and the other members of my group were entirely Christian. There was no other faiths in sight, and just me. And but it ended up being the most incredible summer of being in this classroom setting, learning from my peers, and also being in the hospital, rounding on patients, learning how to do the job and how to give back. And I just fell in love with it. And after that, I stayed on to do a second unit of the training. And then when I finished up my seminary, I went back and did what's called a year-long residency training. And after that, I was very fortunate that there was a job opening back in that original hospital in Queens. And so I've been there ever since. And that's where I was assigned to the palliative, to the end of life team. And that's the work that I do now.
Thank you so much. That is powerful because it's interesting how sometimes life takes us in different journeys we never planned. Sometimes that happens, you know.
Uh-huh.
And many
100%.
people started their careers thinking success is about titles and accomplishments, but then somewhere along the way they feel a call to do something quite deeper and something's rooted in service. I'll say I'll ask this, right? Many people may not fully understand the roles of a chaplain, you know, what a chaplain actually does. What is a healthcare chaplain? What exactly does a healthcare chaplain do in a hospital setting? And why is that role so important for patients and families? You know, if you can shed some light, well, on that, I think it's going to be very fruitful for us to have this discussion.
So chaplains, so we are trained in multi-faith care, which means that a chaplain can visit anyone from any faith or no faith, any language, any stage of life. We are trained to meet every patient and family member where they're at. And we are not there to push a religion on anyone. In fact, if we ever catch any training chaplains doing that, we ask them to leave the program, or we seriously educate them not to do that. We are there to offer spiritual care, to offer love, to offer witnessing, to walk side by side with someone. Because as you've said, the hospital is the loneliest place to be. It's a very fragile time for families, for patients, and it's hard to do it alone. Especially the hospital that we're in Queens, we often have people who somehow ended up there just because the ambulance from the airport brought them to the nearest hospital in sight. And they're there with no family, no friends, no community to support them. So just to have us come and visit and hear their story and hear their pain, and maybe try and connect them to their family, make sure everybody in their family and their community is giving them the care that they need, and just try and connect the dots and be present. That's really what we try and do.
So that that's a very satisfying work that you're able to be there beside patients and their very low moments. What you said reminds me of something profound, like, and that is, like doctors treat the bodies, but like chaplains, they often help care for the soul. And basically, when people are sick, both dimensions really do matter deeply, spirituality and also healing. From your experience working with patients, right? How important is spirituality in this healing process? Because when we think of healing, we often look at healing from the physical side, and we often forget sometimes that there are other components or layers that are there that helps the patient stand on their feet because of various thought process or whatever they're struggling with internally. So when we think of healing, we often think of at the hospital level is a physical healing. But from your experience, as I say, working with patients, how important is spirituality in this healing process?
I think it's absolutely vital, and it's evidence-based. There's a psychologist in Boston called Dr. David Rosmarin, and this is part of his academic work. Is he's proven that spiritual when you pray with a patient, you see that depending on the language of the prayer, especially prayer that includes elevated, lofty language, connection to the divine, connection to something on high, it's shown that it calms the patient down, it centers the patient, it gives them hope, and that has been proven to help their medical outcomes. So things that we intuitively felt were true about the power of spirituality, the power of the divine, the power of community and love, we've actually seen as well from an evidence-based situation that this is actually correct. And I've also seen it with my own eyes. Like the other day I was in the hospital, and when I'm not with palliative care end of life patients, I also like to go into the pediatric unit. And I went into the pediatric unit, and most of our patients don't stay there very long. But I noticed on my list that a certain patient had been there for quite a while. So I went into this patient's room. It was an older teenager. Obviously, I don't give patient details because we protect our patients' identities. Um, but I went into this room, and I thought the patient was sleeping, and I didn't want to disturb them. And I was just going to go out. But then all of a sudden, this little voice comes out: "Chaplain, I'm in pain. I can't sleep. I'm in agony. Pray with me." And it was not a Jewish patient. It was a young lady, a Christian lady in her late teens, and we just sat together and we prayed. And all of a sudden, I felt her body. I felt the tension where she'd been in a ball trying to sleep just lift off
Yeah.
her body. She just turned over and she just went into the most beautiful sleep. And I can't take her ailment away. And I'm not even sure the doctors can. Science doesn't know everything yet. But in that moment, something shifted, and I know that she was able to have a peaceful few hours. What's next, I don't know, but that connection to something higher, and also that beautiful, sweet calling of a teenager calling out to God. There's nothing like it, and being able to be there to help that happen, to help channel that love of God was just an incredible thing, and it went beyond faith. Her and me were from completely different faith traditions, but I was the messenger at that moment, and I was able to help her have that moment that she needed, and she had a peaceful few hours, and I just feel honored to have been able to be there in a small way.
So I want to really thank you for the work that you're doing, in the very vulnerable state of a patient or an individual, that they look forward for that support or some level of guidance or emotional, spiritual support. And, I really want to thank you for that work. There quite often when we talk about spirituality, we get it mixed up with faith and religiosity, religion and spirituality. And and I think there is where the disconnect is. And when we're saying a chaplain provides spiritual and emotional support for a patient, quite often it's misunderstood as religious support in terms of offering a prayer or have a religious thought process or philosophy. Can you shed briefly a light on that difference so that we may able to, draw a clear distinction when you as a chaplain provide that spiritual support in guiding that person towards something that they believe in or their thought process?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And when I think about this, I always think about a visit I had with a certain gentleman who was with his wife, and she was about to pass away. And the gentleman was of my faith tradition. He was Jewish. So I was going into that room and I was ready to talk about Jewish end of life. What is it? What does the Torah have to say about losing a partner? What is the mourning process going to be like? What community supports can I connect him with? But within a few minutes of our conversation, I realized he wasn't connected to his Jewish parts. He wasn't denying his Jewish identity, but the religious aspects of his faith weren't calling him yet. But what was his passion? What was his spirituality? It was baseball. It was the Mets. And that's what he wanted to talk about. And that's where his heart was when he wasn't with his wife. And of course, I put my disappointed sort of Jewish side apart. And then we had this incredible conversation about the Mets. And we used the Mets as a metaphor to guide him through what's going to be next. When his wife is gone, his beloved team will be there. And his beloved team is what's going to carry him through. Hope for the next season. What does the next season look like? What does the next year look like? How is he going to cope with it? What is going to make him want to get up in the morning? How does he mourn losses? We talked about things that had happened in the past in baseball with the Mets, et cetera, and how he built his resilience through his team and
Yeah.
so on and so forth. So, you know, it's a lighter example in some ways not. But to me, that really illustrates the difference between faith-based spirituality and a broader spirituality, and the chaplain's commitment to meet the patient where they're at, regardless of where I may want somebody to be at.
Thank you. Do you see that faith making a difference in how people cope with their illness? Because there are many coping mechanism, and from your experience, can you share from your experience how important faith is in that coping in that
100%. I think faith is absolutely vital, especially in the toughest moments. And our patients guide us in that. Like often I may not really understand theologically what's going on for a patient. I was once with a woman who was in labor, and she was a Catholic woman. She'd already had a priest visit, a Roman Catholic priest come and bless her. And then all of a sudden she called out specifically for a female chaplain, because she was already in the throes of labor and she wasn't quite comfortable with a male
Yeah.
chaplain being around. And she asked me to bring her holy water. Holy water. And I went back to the priest and I was asking him, what is this? How do we do this? And the priest is like, well, this is an unusual request. I'm not really sure I've ever heard of that. But he knew how to create this holy water that was in line with our faith tradition. So he gave me this vial. We found something to put the water in, this little vial, and I brought it back to her, and she was just over the moon. And then we ended up doing a sort of a multi-faith prayer together. And then I still couldn't, and I kept thinking, what was this about? What was this about? And the priest was also puzzled. And then a few hours later, the baby was born. And the
Wow.
baby was born with it was a very difficult labor, and the baby was born with a very significant growth deformity. Very significant. And I realized after that that they knew that. They weren't ready to share it with us, but they knew that, and her faith wanted everything that was possible to help this delivery happen and to help her at the next stages and beyond. And the baby ended up having a series of incredibly successful. The baby was in unbelievable medical hands and had some incredible surgeries, but I just keep coming back to that moment where I was judging, and even the priest was judging, like, what is this holy water thing? But she knew, her faith knew what she needed to get through that impossible moment and beyond. And I was humbled by that.
That's powerful. And one thing, I've been involved in healthcare chaplaincy from close to 2 decades now, right? And one of the things I pride myself by saying that I've learned so much from other faiths, like interacting with chaplains from the Jewish community, chaplains from like the Christian, from Catholic, multi-faith chaplains, and you learn so much about people's faith and how they hold on to their faith, not by merely having a conversation, but by merely visiting a patient that does not share your faith. And you see how they hold on to their faith. I can also take a minute and share with you at one particular point. You know, I knocked at the door of a particular patient and I entered, and the patient was actually end of life. And the family did not matter whether I was a Muslim chaplain or a Jewish chaplain. All they wanted, because of their faith, they wanted someone to pray. And
Mm,
I prayed for someone actively dying, for that patient and also for the family member that is actively dying while they're comforted by the words of God, that they believe that there is a power beyond the power of the humankind. And they accepted me. And that was so powerful that they
mm,
accepted me as a person of God, despite I did not share their faith, to pray for their dying family member. And that brought comfort to the family, and comfort also to the person that was there, because the person was conscious. And I think that's powerful, how people hold on to their faith and they interpret their faith in different ways. There is a chapter in a matter of fact, a verse in the Quran where we're told, indeed, in the remembrance of God, the heart attains tranquil. And uh, our understanding of God or the divine may be different, but however we interpret that divine, I think the point is that it brings tranquil to our hearts. And we are here to direct them towards that point in their faith belief system, or guiding them and facilitating that. Even in suffering, faith can be an anchor for the hearts of faith. Have you witnessed moments where faith and prayer had a powerful impact on facing, on someone facing illness and suffering? Like anything. specific? I know you share that, but from your experience, other than that experience, do you remember anything specific, like where someone accepted you to offer prayer despite of your faith without? Because this notion of multi-faith chaplain, that we feel that we cannot provide emotional support for someone doesn't we do not share that faith with. So from your experience, do you, as a multi-faith chaplain, provided some emotional and spiritual and faith support for someone that you do not share
Ooh,
with?
100%. And I feel like the added layer as well, because I'm female, I've also grappled with it as when I'm meeting someone who in their faith tradition, maybe the female voice wouldn't seem an appropriate way as well to incorporate the kind of prayer that's being sought. So that's also always a time where I'm sort of like surprised when my voice can be a fit, and also sort of humbled and totally accepting when it isn't. But I remember like being called in the middle of the night to a Baptist bedside, and they specifically said that the person cannot they weren't comfortable with their family member leaving without a prayer, without a prayer. And I said multiple times, I said, I'm a Jew. Like, is this the end of life prayer that you want is from somebody outside your faith tradition? Like, I was completely shocked, and they're like, "No, you're a chaplain. You are a leader in your faith community. You do theological work all day long. We would be delighted by your prayer." And I just couldn't. I couldn't believe it. I really couldn't believe it. But when you see it happen, you see the prayer being taken and accepted, and just being understood that in that hospital I stand for something bigger. It's not about me. It's about chaplains being conduits for interacting with the divine. And also just one thing I want to add that I feel really strongly about is this that chaplains, there are times when we may be called on to do something that theologically isn't a fit for us. And one thing that's really important in our training is that they train us how to say no when we need to, how to say no when we need to. So I've been at bedsides where I've been asked to do something that may not be within my faith tradition permitted to do. And I've had to say no, and I've had to find a different chaplain or just step out, and that's okay too. And that's a really important part of our job, is knowing what we can do and also what we can't do, because we have to stay rooted in who we are in the room.
Yes, and that's a powerful message that, as healthcare chaplains that are multi-faith, we are not called or asked to compromise our faith belief, that we do not cross that boundary that our faith does not allow us to cross, that we reach.
Right.
We take care of our own faith belief, but at the same time, we're there to lend our support. And you said, yes, the powerful. If you cannot do something that they're requesting because it compromises your faith, then you're not obligated to do that. And that's the beautiful thing about, we work in cohesion. We work collectively with one understanding. We're there to support families and patients, but without compromising our faith belief. And one of the things I have learned initially from the healthcare chaplain experience that I have, that I was taught about something called an all-inclusive prayer, that where you use terminologies that you're comfortable with, that if you're not comfortable invoking Jesus as God, then we don't do that. We say, "Oh Almighty," something, "Oh Eternal God," for example. And we pray for our Christian brothers and pray for someone does not share our faith, but we're not using terms that we're fully convinced. So for those who may be thinking, how do we provide that support and prayer, and what prayer we offer, that they're an all-inclusive prayer, that where we feel comfortable within the parameters of our faith. So it's thank you so much for sharing that. I once visited someone in the hospital who was critically ill, and the family, since I was sitting around the bed, and they were worried, and they were quite exhausted, and the medical situation hasn't changed yet, uh, but the room changed. Fear turned into like surrender, and basically anxiety turned into peace. And sometimes prayer doesn't change the circumstances immediately, but it changes the heart that's facing those circumstances. So the point of emphasis is that while you are there, your presence and willing to be there, you
Mm,
could see the impact of your mere presence on the families that are there.
mm,
Without even, yes, the circumstances of the patient might not change in terms of their health and their condition, but you can see that there is a change by the mere presence, that they feel that there is someone there in their low moments or the
mm,
moment of need, that a chaplain shows up for no reason, not for recognition, not for any reason except to lend support and to lend your shoulder for them to lean on, or
mm,
to speak or to listen in an non-judgmental way, in an empathetic way. So, you know, again, I'm very delighted to have this conversation, and I'll say that in a city like New York, right? You have hospitals that serves many people from religious traditions, um, Muslims, Jews, Christians, Hindus. We have Buddhists. Queens being quite diverse. So maybe we can take a little bit more of your time in talking about multi-faith chaplaincy, and what are some of the things that we learn in multi-faith chaplaincy to provide support to patients that are not of our faith. I know we just talked about that, but maybe we can talk about in an organized manner,
mm,
how do we do that? How you as a person um, who is Jewish in faith
mm,
provide emotional support and spiritual support to someone who is a Muslim, for example.
mhm.
Yeah.
I think, well, first of all, I think when I step into the room, I feel it's important for me to see the humanity in everyone, in everyone. We are all one people on God's earth. We all share the same values of loving our families, of wanting to enjoy this beautiful world, of wanting to, I think most people want to do good. So I think when we look at someone's eyes and we see that in the other, even if they don't look like us or sound like us or speak the same words we do, we seeing that humanity connects us and gives us room in our hearts to be able to do work together. So I think taking the time first to really create that bond and connect. And we speak to people, we have this interpreter app on our telephone. So even if somebody is speaking a different language, if they speak, let's say, Mandarin, we still find ways to connect, even through an interpreter on the telephone, to talk about their family, to talk about their passions, their interests, what they love. And it's important for me, the way that I really connect with people is trying to make it something that resonates with me. They're talking about their family, I think about my family. They are wearing a beautiful blue sweater, I think about a beautiful blue sweater I have. Finding those connections, those points of entry, I think are so, so important, because when we see the other, that's when we can share, and that's when we can give compassion and do our work. So to me, that's really what it's all about.
Yeah, that's really powerful. Uh, to be a healthier chaplain, we went through rigorous training, right? Yourself and I think there are so many different dimensions to look at this. And I can remember when I was doing my units of clinical pastoral education, that our supervisor was saying to us that you come, you knock at the door of a patient, that person is there in the room. There's a story. There is a story
Mm,
behind that person coming into the room. They just did not enter into the hospital. There's something that happened
mm,
that might be very challenging for them, difficult, was traumatic. So
mm,
you try to basically unravel that, asking them about what brought them there to the hospital, and they were able to express that and help them by just listening to them of that story, what brought them there.
mhm,
And many of times when I ask that question, you hear stories and situations and circumstances that led to individuals enter into that very space that we call the hospital room, stories that brought tears to my eyes, stories that caused me to hold the hand of a patient. Or I can remember one time I literally kissed this Bangladesh guy on his forehead because I saw that it was like my father in front of me. I swear by God.
mhm.
I literally thought that this was my dad here. Being
Oof.
that vulnerable, listen to the story. It is as if I was hearing the story of my father. So, and it doesn't have to be a person who share your faith. Just being there to listen to that story, and also being very observant as well. when you enter into the room, sometimes you see certain things that tells a story,
Mm,
and
right.
to
Mhm.
unravel that story,
Mm,
it's quite important. And you know,
yeah.
I'll I'll ask, one of the most difficult thing as a chaplain would be being beside a patient that is told that they have very minimal time to pass, right? And being a human being, being a person who's a chaplain that has that level of emotion, like especially with religious leaders and chaplains. It's hard when you're visiting a patient, right, Tamar? You're visiting a patient for months. You're following this patient. We refer to this is my patient. Just like the
Mhm.
doctors say, this is my patient. Chaplains say, this is my patient, because you regularly visit that patient.
Mm,
And then you get a call, or you see in the chart that
mm.
that patient doesn't have much more to live after connecting for months and following that patient, um, and talking with the family, and being there at the end of life. Now, how do you cope with that? How do you deal with situation in terms of your personal emotional self-care, and also being there for that family? It seems as if you're visiting someone, you build a bond, and then you have to relinquish that relation because that person is basically gonna die. And I know sometimes it's very challenging. Can you share how that part of a chaplain's work impacts you, and how it impacts other chaplains?
It's so hard. It's so challenging. I mean, off the bat, like the truth is I'm rounding with a palliative team. I'm in the palliative team. So even though basically all the patients I see have just been told that they're going to pass away. So those are the folks I'm seeing. But even within that, the amount of people that I'm actually connecting with their families and building deep relationships with, it's a smaller pool. There's only so much capacity emotionally, time-wise, that I can actually build those kind of relationships. But when I do, and as I do, it's incredibly hard. First of all, it's an honor. Just to say off the bat, it's an honor to walk the walk and really be able to be there all the way through with a family. And in some ways, that's actually easier. In some ways, it's easier. The harder ones is where you really connect with someone and they sort of vanish, or they go home and then they die in another hospital and you never got that end with the family. It's a privilege to really be able to stay to the end and be part of their family, and to help them connect with spirituality throughout. So that's actually the gift. And in terms of how the chaplain handles that, we come out stronger when we can really see it through to the end. It's when we don't get that is actually harder from us. We call that ambiguous loss. And that really leads to a lot of healthcare provider burnout. But even so, each person we give a piece of our heart to, and we keep wondering, does the heart keep growing? How many pieces do I have in my heart? And how do I keep my pieces for when I come home, for my husband, for my family? Like, I want to make sure my heart's there for them. If my husband had a hard day, I need to be able to hear about it. I can't just be like, no, no, no. I was all day with this family from Flushing. I can't hear about your problems. You can't have any problems. Are you alive? Good. Okay. Now it's about them. So that's not possible. We can't lead our lives like that. But thank goodness, like, we've been through this incredible training that teaches us how to handle that. One part of that is making sure that we use our team, our fellow chaplains, to unpack our pain. We do it at work. We do it in this incredibly trained multi-faith office. That's a really big piece. And I'm blessed to have incredible coworkers to explore that with. So when I leave the burden, the emotional burden, in the office. That's the first part. And the second part is we are we have to stay deeply rooted in our faith. Most chaplains are ordained ministers in their faith. They are leading prayer services. They are teaching their holy texts. That is the work that we need to do to be able to always be connected to our higher power, to be able to take on this weightiness, to remember that it's not about us. It really isn't. We may be messengers. We may be there in that moment, but there's something much bigger going on that really isn't about us. And if you're not rooted in prayer, in text, in your personal life, that's not going to happen. That's really not going to happen. It's going to be about my ego. It's going to be about what I need. And that's not where it's at. And then the other thing is our training. One thing that is brilliant in our training, which seemed brutal, was that we were taught when somebody passes away, we can have one phone call. or we can have one email, or with permission from our boss, we're supposed to have a
Yeah.
check-in, we can go to the funeral. But that's it. We have to cut it off. And it seems brutal, and there are times where I hate the rules, but it completely protects us from knowing where the boundaries are and from remembering who we are. So,
Well, thank you. Thank you so much. While we learn about the boundaries, I know it's quite challenging sometimes to, to know that professional boundary because emotions and feelings are involved and care is involved. And so, you know, uh, from your experience walking beside people during their final days, what do people tend to reflect on most? Maybe you can share your thoughts. What do you think that people often reflect on at that particular point at the end of life? I
I
know that
think
you're in palliative. Maybe before you answer that,
mhm.
palliative care chaplain, can you share a little bit for our audience? You know what that is. You know, a palliative care chaplain, and through your reflection, maybe you can share briefly what people often think about most during that time.
Oh, absolutely. So the palliative care team in a hospital gets involved when a patient has a condition or multiple conditions that the team has decided or realized cannot be cured. So once someone is not in curative medicine, they become in what's called palliative medicine. So what the team will do, the nurses and the doctors will do is help treat the pain, but they can't cure anything anymore. So at the moment when we realize a patient is heading in that zone. For example, if cancer cannot be controlled anymore, or end-stage renal disease, or end-stage heart disease, then basically we're just trying to deal with pain management and making sure that the last weeks, months, days, hours that the patient has are comfortable and as pain-free as possible, and that they are able to have as quality of life as possible, to do the things that are meaningful to them and to say the goodbyes they need to say. And part of palliative medicine, which is amazing for chaplaincy, is that it really embraces spirituality. It really understands that chaplains are needed, and they call on us. Other areas of the hospital, they're a little more like, "Why is a chaplain here? Why do we don't need religion here. Who are those people?" But when you come to the palliative team, they're like, "Guys, come in. We need you. They're excited to see us. So as a chaplain, it's actually it's a difficult place to practice, but it's exciting. And and in terms of what we see for end of life, I think the amazing thing to me is that I've been at the bedside of, at least a dozen different faith traditions. You name it, I've been there with Catholic, Greek Orthodox, Muslim, Jewish, Hindu, Buddhist, and there's two themes that you see recurring throughout. It's love and it's repentance. It's fixing relationships, it's repair, it's making sure that anything that I need to fix with a loved one, with the divine, with my community, that I have the time to do that, and also just showing love. So those two things, love and repentance, are what comes up throughout with everybody. It may look in different ways, it may be done in different ways, but that's what I see throughout.
So yeah, it's striking how often people will speak about love and family and forgiveness and faith, and rarely does someone think about, I wish I worked more, or instead they say, I wish I spend more time with the people that I love.
Yeah.
And that's the sense of compassion that is dear at that moment. And if there is one message you wish more people understand about compassion and caring for others, maybe you can, what would that be?
Oh, that's so hard. That's so hard. I think it's to meet people where they're at. I think my idea of compassion was always like this Hallmark card version of everybody hugging each other and everybody just, being deeply in love and being mushy-gushy. And I think what I've learned from seeing so many families now over the years is that compassion, it can be loud and gushing, it can also be small, it can be wordless, it can be touchless. Some families don't wanna touch each other. Some mothers and daughters shouldn't hug each other. That's not their relationship. But there can be love and forgiveness and goodbyes without that. And that's where they're at, and that's okay. So I think it's really about people meeting each other where they're at and and just being true to themselves in their relationship.
Tamar, the time is up for this episode, but I'm very delighted that we had some level of discussion about healthcare chaplaincy and the work that people like yourself and others and do at the hospital. And um, if there is maybe something that you can share to sensitize people about chaplaincy, healthcare chaplaincy, what it takes to become a chaplain, and you know how important this work is. If you can just summarize that, so that we can conclude today with a final thought.
Thank you. First of all, it's such an honor being here. Really, just such a powerful conversation. I'm really grateful, and I would just encourage people. Uh, if God forbid somebody ends up in the hospital and the chaplain comes by, give them a few seconds, see what the conversation's like, and don't necessarily block a chaplain from coming in, especially for a loved one, because one may not be at one's loved one's bedside all the time. They may want some company. They may want somebody with them, and we are trained to meet people where they're at, not to evangelize, to be open to different faith traditions, to just sit and witness and give care and give love. And who doesn't need that and who can't benefit from that? And if a person has different needs, tell us, we'll adapt. We're not the chaplain, ask for a different one, but we are a service. We're part of what's offered in a hospital at the most incredibly difficult times, and we just want to help and we want to be there.
And something amazing you said, that research was done to show that spirituality and support do help in the healing process. And maybe we can emphasize that if you do have this care for your family or even for yourself, that this type of research was done in terms of um, assisting someone at that low moment through their spirituality or through guidance. And we are not there as chaplains. You are not there as a chaplain to convert anyone or to change someone's thought process, but to lend that support and continue the amazing work that you are doing. And I think most of the hospital has a chaplaincy department where it shows unity and togetherness. We learn from each other. We grow through learning from each other, from our different experiences, and also from our different faith background. It's one of the setting I really admire. I think I grow as a person through my exposure to chaplaincy, healthcare chaplaincy, through my units and also interaction. I grow in my thought process, in my personal competencies, and I'm very delighted to have you as a colleague and someone that I work with in a setting of providing spiritual and emotional care for patients. And may God bless you, and bless your family and bless the work that you're doing. And thank you so much for sharing this space with us. And I'm sure that the listeners would actually, and the viewers will actually benefit from your experience. And once again, thank, thank you so much. Any final words, and then we'll conclude.
Well, just want to wish everybody a Ramadan Mubarak, and what an honor to be here. Thank you. And just,
And
just,
thank you
just
so much. I hope we can
uh,
continue talking a little
to
bit
be
more on
also,
other
yeah,
aspects of chaplaincy. And
absolutely.
thank you. Please ask my viewers to kindly subscribe to this Ramadan podcast. After the month of Ramadan, we will continue speaking about very important, relevant subject areas that will help families, will help the community, not religious specific, but community discussions that will help us to find a better versions of ourselves and to cause us to think in a different way. So just follow us on our YouTube channel and also Spotify and Apple Podcasts. We really appreciate it. Thank you so much and love you all. Have a blessed day.